The first sign something was wrong came as a tremor, subtle, like a heartbeat skipping a beat. Trev glanced at the engine monitor, then at Captain James Harper. "Something's off with the left engine," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It wasn't." Harper didn't answer. He was scanning the gauges, calm as a monk in a storm. Outside the cockpit window, clouds moved slow and lazy. Inside, time was speeding up. Then it happened. Warning sirens. Blinking red. The left engine lost pressure. Altitude started dropping. Not fast, but fast enough to matter. "We're losing altitude." Trev's hand shook on the yoke. He started flipping switches, muttering to himself. "Hydraulics, engine reset, shit, come on." The plane jolted. Not violently, but enough for Trev to feel it in his gut. I got it," he shouted. He didn't. His moves were frantic. Uncoordinated. He was chasing control like a man trying to grab a shadow. James Harper, 30 years in the sky, didn't move a muscle. "Captain." Harper turned slowly. His eyes, calm and piercing, met Trev's. "Step away." "What?" "I said, step away." Trev froze. Harper reached across, took the yoke with deliberate precision. In seconds, his hands ran through the controls like a jazz pianist, smooth, intentional, effortless. Stability started creeping back in. The sirens dulled. Altitude leveled. And Trev just stood there, sweating, watching a man work magic in silence. "You panicked," Harper said, eyes still forward. "We don't panic up here." Trev opened his mouth to defend himself. But the cockpit lights flickered. And something in the cabin made a sound that didn't belong at 11,000 meters. A deep, metallic thud. Harper stiffened. Slowly, he turned his head toward the cabin door. And for the first time since the flight began, his calm cracked. The thud wasn't just a sound. It felt wrong. Heavy. Close. Trev looked over his shoulder, confused. That wasn't turbulence. "No," Harper said flatly, unstrapping his harness. "It wasn't." He stood up. For a moment, he just listened. The cockpit was quiet again, except for the hum of the instruments. That hum, the background noise every pilot gets used to, now felt like a wall, keeping something out. Trev leaned closer to the cockpit door, trying to hear through it. Did something fall? Maybe a cart? But Harper shook his head. Carts don't make that kind of sound. That was structural. Trev's eyes widened. "Wait, you think it's the plane?" Harper didn't answer. Instead, he pulled up the system diagnostics. Internal pressure, holding. Cabin status, green. Doors, sealed. Everything looked fine. But something was off. Then, another sound. 3 soft knocks. On the other side of the cockpit door. Trev flinched. What the hell? Harper didn't flinch. But his hand slowly moved toward the emergency lock override. "That door's reinforced," Trev said. "Nothing can get through, right?" Harper's jaw was tight. "It's not about what can. It's about why someone, or something, is knocking at 11,000 meters." Trev swallowed hard. Then the comms crackled to life. A voice. Muffled. Garbled. Static heavy. But it was unmistakably inside the plane. "Harper, do you read me? You need to see this." It was the head flight attendant. Voice shaky. Almost whispering. Trev reached for the comm switch. "This is the cockpit, what's going on back there?" Silence. Then just 6 words came through. "There's someone on board, not listed." Trev stared at the radio like it had just spoken in tongues. "Not listed," he echoed. How is that even possible? Harper didn't answer. He was already running the manifest: names, seats, crew, jump seats. A seasoned pilot knew better than to ignore a voice like that, especially at cruising altitude. Especially one that sounded like it was holding back panic. Flight 372, he murmured to himself, scanning. 172 souls on board. 5 crew. All accounted for at takeoff. Then what the hell was she talking about? Trev asked. The comm crackled again. This time, a scream. Short. Cut off. Trev flinched. Jesus Christ. Harper didn't hesitate. He slammed the cockpit intercom. This is the captain. I need a status report from any flight crew. Respond immediately. Static. Nothing. Then. Emergency Protocol, Section C. The words came low, fast, and laced with fear. Harper froze. Trev blinked. What's Section C? Harper looked at him. It's code for cabin lockdown. Only used if there's an active, unidentified threat on board. Like a bomb? No, Harper said, coldly. Like a person. Trev stared. You think we've got a hijacker? But Harper didn't answer. He was already keying in the override to the internal cams. A grainy black and white feed lit up on the cockpit display, cycling through cabin views. Passengers. Calm. Reading. Sleeping. Then camera 3. Harper leaned in. Row 17. A man. Sitting straight up. Pale. Eyes open, but wrong. Not blinking. Not moving. And no one sitting around him seemed to notice him at all. Trev narrowed his eyes. He's not doing anything. Could be just. He wasn't there at takeoff, Harper said. You sure? I sat right behind that row during pre-check. That seat was empty. They both stared at the screen. Then, suddenly, the man turned his head. Not slowly. Not naturally. Like a marionette yanked by invisible strings. And he looked directly into the camera. Trev stepped back like he'd been slapped. Harper's voice was low. He knows we're watching. Harper shut off the cabin feed. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. Because when something looks back at you through a camera that shouldn't be looking, you don't keep staring, you act. We're doing a walk, Harper said, unstrapping. What? Trev half rose from his seat. You can't leave the cockpit, not with, whatever that is, back there. If I wait too long, Harper said, grabbing the emergency flashlight and unlocking the door code, there might not be a cockpit to return to. But protocol. Screw protocol. The door hissed open. Harper paused on the threshold. He turned to Trev. Lock the door behind me. No matter what you hear. Don't open it until I knock 4 times. Exactly 4. Trev swallowed. And if it's not you? Harper met his eyes, something ancient and unreadable in his expression. Then don't open it. The door closed behind him with a final, metallic click. Silence. Trev sat in the captain's chair, heart hammering, staring at the row of lifeless instruments, like they might suddenly whisper something he didn't want to hear. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Harper moved down the aisle with quiet authority. The passengers didn't notice him. Most were asleep, some wearing headphones. A kid peeked at him through the gap between 2 seats. He smiled weakly. The kid didn't smile back. Row 10. 12. 14. Then. Row 17. Empty. No one there. Harper blinked. Looked again. Still empty. He glanced up. The seat number was right. So where? Then he noticed something. A seatbelt was buckled tight. But no one sat in it. The cushion beneath was indented, as if someone had just gotten up, or was still there. Just not visible. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed 2 fingers on the seat. It was warm. Suddenly, movement. To his left, a woman in row 18 sat up sharply, gasping like she'd been underwater. Harper turned. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She blinked at him, confused. Then whispered, "He was just there. In the aisle." "Who?" "The man from that seat." She pointed. "He was standing right next to you." Harper didn't turn around. Instead, he slowly raised the flashlight, and clicked it on. The beam hit something. Not fully there. Not fully gone. A shimmer in the aisle, like heat rising off asphalt. And 2 eyes, impossibly deep, staring back at him. The flashlight beam shook, just slightly, as Harper stared into those eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't scared. They were empty. Like staring into a place where thoughts used to be. Then, gone. The shimmer vanished. The aisle was empty again. Harper exhaled, a slow breath through his nose. He didn't blink. He turned to the woman in 18C. "Did you see that?" She nodded, pale. I don't know what I saw. But it saw me too." Harper crouched, checking the underseat compartments. Nothing. He stood, glancing up at the air vent. Nothing again. Every logical option, ruled out in 5 seconds flat. Except one. Something unnatural was on this plane. He reached for his comm, ready to tell Trev to initiate a controlled descent, when the plane jolted. Hard. A full-body shudder. Overhead bins snapped open, bags spilled into the aisles. Gasps. Screams. Trev's voice crackled through Harper's earpiece. "We just lost altitude again. Autopilot disengaged itself, I didn't touch a thing." Harper moved fast, storming back toward the cockpit, pushing past passengers and swinging doors. He knocked. 4 times. Sharp. Precise. The door opened. Trev looked panicked. "What's going on?" Harper barked. Trev pointed at the monitor. It switched itself to manual. "I swear I didn't." Then he stopped. Both men stared at the autopilot panel. The manual control lever was pulled. But neither of them had touched it. And across the touch screen, written in glitchy digital letters that had no business being there, was a single message. "You took my seat." Silence. Harper slowly turned to Trev. "Pull the manifest again. Double-check every name. Cross-reference with the seating chart." Trev's fingers flew. Rows 1 to 5, checked. 6 to 10, normal. 11 to 16, clean. Row 17. Trev's voice dropped to a whisper. "There is no row 17 on the manifest. The row doesn't exist." Harper didn't flinch. "Of course it doesn't." Then the lights in the cockpit dimmed. Flickered. And a new sound entered the space. Breathing. Slow. Ragged. But not from either of them. The kind of breathing that came from someone, or something, standing just behind your shoulder. Trev didn't move. Couldn't. The sound of breathing wasn't loud. That made it worse. It was soft. Wet. Too close. Harper didn't turn around. Instead, he slowly reached toward the cabin light switch, then, click. Bright light flooded the cockpit. Nothing. The space behind them was empty. But the breathing? Still there. Every hair on Trev's arm stood up. Harper grabbed the emergency oxygen mask from its housing and handed it to Trev. Put it on. Not because of the altitude. Because you're about to hyperventilate. Trev slipped it on with trembling hands. What is this? Ghosts don't show up on planes, man. Harper's eyes were cold steel. They do when they never got off one. He tapped the manifest screen again, scrolling through the digital logs, this time, the archived ones. Flights from years past. Search, row 17. The screen stuttered. Then displayed a result. Flight 372, March 11, 1996. Same flight number. Same route. Passenger, Eli Ward, seat 17A. Trev read aloud. Suffered cardiac arrest mid-flight. Declared dead on arrival. Seat left undisturbed for remainder of trip. Harper muttered, that was the day I earned my captain's wings. Trev blinked. You were on that flight. I was the co-pilot. It was my first emergency. The screen shifted again. Status, deceased. Rebooked, Flight 372. March 28, 2025. Seat, 17A. Trev stared. That's today. Harper just nodded. Then the cockpit door rattled. Violently. Like something was throwing itself against it. But the pressure was wrong. It wasn't fists. It wasn't even human. It was like weight. Grief made solid. Rage given form. The oxygen mask slipped from Trev's face. We're trapped, man. No, Harper said calmly. We're not trapped. He stood, hands steady. He is. Trev blinked. You mean Eli? Harper shook his head. I mean me. Trev backed away from Harper like the air had just turned toxic. What do you mean you're the one who's trapped? Harper didn't answer right away. He walked back to the captain's seat, calm like the storm outside didn't exist. He sat, eyes locked on the altitude readout. We didn't lose the engine, he said quietly. That was him, Eli. Reminding me. Trev was still trying to process. Reminding you of what? Harper glanced over. That he died while I was in charge. A long silence fell. Just the hum of the plane and the whisper of regret. I thought you said you were co-pilot, Trev finally said. Harper smiled. But there was no pride in it. That's what the report said. Company couldn't afford the bad press. He leaned forward, like he was seeing ghosts in the glass. He was having a heart attack. Right there in the seat. And I froze. Everyone thought I was calm, collected, but I wasn't. I was terrified. I didn't radio it in. Didn't divert. Thought he was faking. Just some guy who didn't want to fly. Trev was speechless. I could have saved him. But I sat there, watching. Thinking he'd snap out of it. Harper exhaled through his nose. He didn't. A quiet ding, seatbelt sign flickered. For no reason. Trev looked up. So what, he came back for revenge. Harper shook his head. Not revenge. Just recognition. Ghosts don't haunt places. They haunt guilt. Then something changed in the air. Cabin lights flickered, and for the first time, they both heard voices. Passengers whispering. Chanting. But not words. A loop. A sound. A rhythm. Trev turned toward the comm screen, and his blood ran cold. The cabin feed had come back on. But it wasn't the cabin anymore. It was empty. All the rows vanished. Just a long, flickering hallway of seats that stretched further than the plane could possibly be. And in the middle, in the aisle, sat a man. Eli. Pale. Still. eyes straight ahead. But this time, he spoke. Not aloud. Right into the cockpit speakers. You don't get to fly away from this. Harper didn't even blink. He whispered back, then tell me what you want. Eli's face on the monitor didn't move. But Trev noticed something else. The flight path was changing. Not just turning. Rewriting. The system was plotting a course, downward. 11,000 meters. 9,000, 7,500. Trev lunged for the controls. He's crashing the plane. But the yoke locked. And Harper didn't stop him. 7,000 meters. Alarms were blaring now. Systems failing in a slow, deliberate sequence, as if someone was choosing which to kill next. Trev was yelling, hands on the yoke, but it wouldn't move. The autopilot wouldn't disengage. The aircraft wasn't just falling, it was being lowered. Like a hand guiding it somewhere it didn't belong. We have to reboot. Trev shouted. Hard reset, something. Harper didn't move. He was staring at the screen. At Eli. Still sitting in that endless aisle that didn't exist. I was young, Harper said, almost to himself. I thought doing nothing was safer than doing the wrong thing. And people paid for that. 6,000 meters. James, Trev snapped, we're going to die. No, Harper said softly. I am. Trev froze. What? Harper turned to him, and for the first time since the flight began, he smiled. Not with peace. Not with fear. With decision. You said ghosts don't show up on planes, Harper murmured. But sometimes, they never left. Trev's breath caught. Because suddenly, Eli wasn't on the screen anymore. He was in the cockpit. Standing behind Harper. Hand on his shoulder. But Harper didn't look scared. He just nodded, once. And then. He pushed the emergency override. The one that severs pilot control from every system. A reset no one ever uses, because it requires manual confirmation. From the captain only. Trev watched in stunned silence as Harper whispered into the console. One seat. One soul. That's the price, right? The lights surged. Systems rebooted. The yoke unlocked. Altitude stabilized at 5,800 meters. Trev lunged, grabbed control, re-engaged manual flight. He turned to say something, anything, but the seat next to him was empty. Harper was gone. Not dead. Not slumped over. Just, gone. No trace. No body. Just the faint, fading scent of jet fuel and aftershave. A voice crackled in the radio. Flight 372, you dipped off radar for a minute, confirm status. Trev pressed the mic. This is First Officer Trev Lee. We're stable. Returning to original altitude. Captain Harper. A pause. Captain Harper is no longer with us. Epilogue. They found no explanation. All systems logged Harper's actions. The override was real. The descent, recorded. But no footage showed Eli. And Harper's ID badge was found, lying neatly on seat 17A. Trev still flies. But every year, on March 28, he leaves that seat empty. Just in case someone still wants it.